So like the title says, was Hody Jones a bad villain in One Piece? Now there's multiple reasons why I'm making this video topic. Number one, the big reason is that I have been rewatching the One Piece anime, and as you all know, kind of keeping you up to date, I have been making quite a few One Piece videos recently, kind of like looking back at certain arcs or whatever, talking about how I feel and how One Piece has aged very well. I mentioned and talked about this in my recent manga chapter reviews, and even in my Chibi questions, I have talked about how I've been rewatching One Piece. And just today, me and my friend, we finished the Fishman Island arc in the One Piece anime. Now, this is the first time my friend has ever watched it, and this is my first time I've ever actually went out of my way to rewatch One Piece. I've always seen certain scenes by going back and looking at clips. I've actually never went out of my way to rewatch the entirety of this series, so it's a really good experience for me to see kind of how much has changed in the journey and all that of One Piece, and how good of a writer Oda really is. And so after finishing the arc of, Fishman Island today, a question popped up in my head. And it's something that I remember from a very long time ago when I was actually getting into One Piece and when I was actually a consistent watcher of the One Piece anime, when I was still with it and I was with it weekly, watching every single episode when it came out like on a Saturday. I remember that at the time of this arc, I remember seeing many people on the comments and stuff saying like, Hody actually feels just like, Arlong 2.0. He's a very bad villain. He really is just like fodder. He is weak compared to Luffy. He's like a scrub. I remember hearing all these different comments about, Hody Jones when I was watching this arc for the first time, and I remember shaking my head saying, I agree with that. That's something I actually remember doing when I first watched this arc in One Piece. Now, granted, this was a very long time ago. It's been a long time since this arc was in the anime and even in the manga, and a lot of years have passed since then. And like I said, I've only ever really seen this arc once, and now twice since I just finally rewatched it. And at the time, I remember agreeing with those comments and what many people said that, Hody Jones, he was very weak, inferior, and he was a big disappointment overall, because, when you back up and you look at everything prior to that arc, when you think about it, like, we were so used to these insane fights and all that Luffy had to stand up and go up against. We think about the Warden from Impel Down, we think about everything in Marineford and all that. When you see all these different characters Luffy had to fight since then, you're like, Hody Jones, after that time skip, he isn't that strong at all. He was very weak, and that's why many were really upset with his character, or really didn't care about him in the first place. And so at the time when I was actually, watching the series, I remember agreeing with everybody and saying, like, yeah, Hody Jones, he's very weak. He's Arlong 2.0. He doesn't really have much else going on, and I'm like, he's not really that interesting of a character. That was my general opinion of Hody Jones when I first saw him, and it was actually my opinion of him until I just finished this arc once again, until I went out of my way to rewatch One Piece. And then my opinion of his character has drastically changed, and I want to dive into that and kind of explain how I feel about his character, give some insight to what he stood for, but also kind of how I feel about him now. So anyways, to get right into it though, who is Hody Jones? Like, what did he do? Why is he Arlong 2.0? Why does people not like him? So let's get into the details of why many didn't like his character. Like I've already said, he was a character that was the first villain after the time skip. When Luffy and all the other Straw Hats, they got their upgrades and stuff, and they were about to go to the New World, Fishman Island was the first arc after that. Now, granted, Fishman Island was an arc that has been building up for a very long time. Like, right at the end of, Thriller Bark, it was a big arc. It was constantly being talked about, built up, and many were getting excited about it. It was even being built up in Water 7. And so many are like, oh man, this is probably going to be an amazing arc when we finally get there, because, time skip, Luffy and his upgrades, it's probably going to be some crazy villains and stuff here. Many of us were really looking forward to it because, Arlong, when we saw him back in the past in the Nami arc a long time ago, everybody was hyped up because he was a crazy strong villain, and so we're all looking forward to seeing what would happen in Fishman Island. And so many had these high expectations going into the arc, thinking like everybody's going to be ridiculously OP, like insane. And when we finally got to see the villains and how all of them got defeated, many were very upset because they were so used and accustomed to everything that happened prior with Marineford and all that, that they just weren't used to villains that could just, become scrubs. Like, they were just legit scrubs and getting, swept under the rug. And so many just didn't like that. But then on top of that, too, when it comes to overall Hody Jones's, character, when you first see him, he is very similar in terms of design-wise. His design is slightly similar to Arlong, and many can pull the comparisons there, and that's why many like to say he's Arlong 2.0. But to go a step further, many also said because of his motives. He was a racist. He didn't like humanity. He didn't like humans. And so, because of that, that also made his overall opinions, his viewpoint, very similar to Arlong. And once again, that goes along with why people called him Arlong 2.0. And so, that is why many didn't really like his character. It seemed like he was just a very lazy character, and he didn't really seem much different from what we saw prior in the series. And that's why many kind of, like I said, swept him under the rug. However, like I said, that's what I used to feel. But then I rewatched the arc, and I think anyone that has actually either really paid attention to that arc and looked at the build-up of that arc, and then went back to rewatch it, reread it, whatever, most likely might have a similar opinion as I do right now. And the opinion I have right now is that Hody Jones was never meant to be strong. He was never meant to be someone for Luffy to struggle against and, have a hard time. Because, number one, when we look at the fight in general with, Hody versus, Luffy, Hody had to use these energy steroid pills to be able to even compete with Luffy's strength. And he had to, just eat these like he was eating, like, a candy corn. That's how much he was eating them. He was just, like, snacking on them and all that, like they were just crazy sweets and stuff, and this man was just getting stronger and stronger. And FYI, one of these, energy steroid pills could increase a fishman's strength that was already at 10 times the strength of a human, up to 20 times the strength of a human. That's just one pill. And so if this man was taking, like, 2 or 5, that would be ridiculous. But that was the thing, though. Hody Jones, he was eating hundreds upon hundreds of these pills. He was just snacking on him throughout the entire arc, which is what put him at the level of Luffy, and why many also were very disappointed with his character, because he had to rely on something like this just to be able to get at the realm of Luffy and the Straw Hats, or any of the villains in that arc, just to be able to compete with him. And once again, that led to the disappointment, and why many were upset with that arc, is because they weren't legitimately strong. They had to rely on this other thing to be able to get them up to that level. So, yeah, even though many actually think that, I actually think that was a very clever thing for Oda to do, because number one, it makes logical sense why Hody Jones and his crew was slightly able to do some form of damage to the Straw Hats, even though they all got whooped and they really weren't strong at the grand scheme of things. Like, they got destroyed in the arc. They were able to kind of overcome certain levels of what normal rookies would be, and they were kind of indicating and showing how strong the Straw Hats have gotten. That's what the entire arc of that was. For Fishman Island arc, it was basically showcasing Luffy and the Straw Hats' strength and how stronger they have gotten, and that they are no longer pushovers, and they are definitely completely different from what they were prior to the time skip. And so, seeing all these characters getting defeated, it makes perfect sense. But also, when they got this, power-up through the energy steroid, it also made it where it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere or bad writing, because it made logical sense with the steroid. And also because of that, it had its major drawbacks, since it took away the life force of the individual and made him much older. And as we know at the end of the arc, Hody Jones and his entire crew, they aged rapidly, and they no longer could really do anything at all. They're basically old, crippled people that can't do anything. So there was massive drawbacks for that power they got to put them at the realm of where the Straw Hats were, but even then, it still was not enough. So I do like how clever that was done. I do like how Oda implemented that. After rewatching the arc, I'm actually satisfied he did that, because if they would have been as strong as Luffy and all that right after the time skip, it would have felt very cheap. It would have felt like, Luffy and all them, their training still was not enough, and basically that they need to go through another time skip, or they should have went for a 4-year time skip instead of a 2. Many would have probably thought that if, Hody Jones all them would have came in and started whooping them. So, the way Oda handled that, I think that was the best way to do it. Many might disagree, but I think that was one of the best ways to handle Hody and his entire crew's overall level of strength. Now, let's go a step further, though, okay? So, let's get into the, argument of, Hody Jones being Arlong 2.0. The reason for this is because, once again, it is the racism that, fishmen feel towards humanity. And this is a plot point that was building up for a very long time since Nami. When Nami was introduced and all that, that's how long this plot point has been building up. It was a very crucial, plot point for the entirety of the story for One Piece for a very long time. And throughout this series, if you watch and pay attention, throughout the arcs, throughout, Alabasta, throughout, Skypiea, throughout, Thriller Bark, throughout Water 7, you just see these little things that pop up here and there that imply that there is still discrimination against fishmen, and it's a very big thing. And when we get to Sabaody, it kind of flips everything on its head. When we get there, we're like, oh man, it's not just, fishmen being racist to humans, it's, the exact opposite. It's actually humans being racist to fishmen, and it flips everything on its head. Everything that we saw Arlong do at the early stages of One Piece, he was only doing this because you had, humans going out of their way and doing what they did to fishmen. So we got to see a different point of view. We got to see the other side of what caused people like Arlong to even exist in the first place. And that was a very crucial time, and it was all up in your face, basically, to let us know that this is very critical and very important for the end game of the series. Time passes, we go through a lot of arcs. We go through, Impel Down, Thriller Bark, we go for all these certain arcs and all that, Marine Ford, we get the flashback with Sabo and stuff, and then we finally get to Fishman Island, and it finally tackles this big plot point that's been building up for hundreds of chapters, hundreds of episodes. We're finally there. And so when we get there, we meet this character, Hody Jones, which, like I said, design-wise, he's very similar to Arlong, but instead of being like what Arlong is, Hody Jones, he is a great white shark. His model is a great white shark. And he also is very similar to Arlong. He is racist. He doesn't like humanity. And the thing is once he actually gets his motive explained and what he is, that's what makes him a very intriguing character. When he's asked by one of the princes from King Neptune, and the prince asks, like, why are you like this? Like, what's your role, or what's your purpose, your motive, and what has humanity done to you? And this is something that many at first glance might not really catch or care too much about, because it just will go over your head, or you won't realize how different this is from everything else that we've seen from One Piece. Hody Jones says nothing. Humanity has done nothing to him. Nothing to the people that was a part of his crew, nothing to him in general. He has not personally been affected by humanity at all. He states this, and at first glance maybe like, okay, so he's a very empty individual. He's someone that just doesn't have a motive at all. But that's what makes Hody Jones a very fascinating character, because let's back up real quick, okay? Let's, take a few, back steps and all that, and let's think about prior villains, okay? A lot of the villains throughout One Piece, the reason why they act like they do is because of circumstance, what led them to be like they are. For instance, their backstory. Like, let's think of a recent example, spoiler alert if you're not past Fishman Island, let's think about Doffy, okay? Doffy was a villain. The reason why he acted like he did was because of his upbringing and also what he was taught, but also because of his backstory, what led him into that, like this tragic backstory. And so, when you compare something like that to someone like, Hody Jones, you're like, whoa, it's completely different. It's a very different, story perspective from what we've gotten from other villains or other characters throughout the series, because usually villains or the main characters, like the good characters, all that, they have some form of sad past that led them to be like they are, and it's like something that becomes very stereotypical in One Piece. However, Hody Jones, he breaks that mold. He completely breaks that mold, and he is someone that was not affected by anyone. He acts like he does. He acts like this vile person because he can. And it made him very different. He wasn't forced to be like that. He chose that. He was this vile person, not because of a sad backstory, but because he chose it himself, which, like I said, makes him for a very compelling and fascinating character, and that could easily go over everybody's heads and not realize how great that was as a character, especially the way, Oda handled it. Number one, let's look at what this necessarily means. He was created by the environment of Fishman Island, or the Fishman District. And what this means is that even though nothing was ever done to him, like he was never personally affected, he was never someone that was attacked by humanity or anything like that, the reason why he acts like he does was because we see a brief little flashback. He was a child, and he got to see all these people around him. He got to see Fisher Tiger. I'm sorry, I got the name wrong. Fisher Tiger. And also he got to see Arlong and all that. All these adults around him, and then all the adults' parents and stuff, be very, very, very racist. Or the way they acted, it showed that they didn't want to be around humans at all. They didn't even try. And so, as someone that's like a kid, Hody Jones that was a kid, he was able to be warped and developed by the environment around him. It's kind of like this. It's the upbringing. Like, if you don't have someone to push you down the proper path, obviously, you could possibly steer down the darker path. In this case, Hody Jones, he never had that parental figure in his life. He never had this parental figure. He never had someone to tell him what was right and wrong. He never had anyone to tell him that, hey, you know, this is bad, you shouldn't be acting like this, you should, you know, try to be a little bit nicer, not act like a vile person. And since he never had someone in his life to kind of tell him what was morally right or morally wrong, he chose his own answers, which makes perfect sense. Since he was a child, when no one to really teach him the right thing, he was just taking from example. He was watching the people around him, how they acted, how they treated humans, how, you know, humans treated fishmen. He was just looking at all these things, and he formed his own moral compass. That's what he got. He formed his own roles, or own morals and all that, what he wanted to do, not because someone told him to do it, but because he was just going by example. What he saw around him, his environment, is what led him to be like he was. And this is very, very real, a very realistic outtake or look at when it comes to how real life is. In certain parts of the world, there's a lot of places like that. For instance, someone could be, you know, a very vile individual, but nothing really was ever done to them. It's just because their environment is what led them to be like they are. And so in some ways you could kind of pity, you know, Hody Jones for how he acts, because he never really had anything in his life. He just was following by example from the adults, and that's what led him to be like he was. And that's what the entire message was. Hody Jones, he wasn't necessarily a villain that, you know, should have been hard to defeat. For instance, he wasn't a villain that should have stood up to Luffy and been this hard villain and all that, like, you know, Arlong. Hody Jones, he was more like a symbol. He was the very essence of racism. That's what he was. That's what Hody Jones stood for. He was that message. He was basically everything that fishmen were trying to, you know, fight against. They didn't want to ever, you know, shake hands with humanity. Hody Jones was born thanks to that. He was racism itself, the embodiment of it. And so when he was in that arc, basically, it was just more of a statement. If you bring him down, we could finally start at zero, which that was the end of it. We could finally start at zero. When they finally started zero, is because they defeated the racism, which was Hody Jones. He was built because of how everybody was around him. And so if they could finally get rid of that and stop acting like that, then they could finally start making a bridge for the coexistence between fishmen and humans. So I felt that very fascinating, that at the end of the day, it was like, you know, Hody Jones, he was more of a martyr than anything else. He wasn't necessarily a, like, villain that was very hard, like at the level of, like, an admiral or something that should have been ridiculous. He was just more of a message. That's what he was. That was his entire purpose, was this message and martyr for the relationship between humans and fishmen. That's exactly what that was. So I do like how Oda handled that. I do like how he handled, you know, Hody's character, because it makes him very different from everything else we have seen. Does it make him my favorite villain? No, he's not my favorite villain of One Piece. However, I do feel like he's really underrated as a villain, and I feel like he's actually discredited way too much because of how Oda wanted to write him. He's a very different character and villain of an arc, and I think many want to discredit him because he just seems very similar to Arlong, and in a lot of ways, he is not like Arlong. He is definitely not like him. He is much different, stands for so much more, because when you look and compare the two characters, Arlong was someone that was very compassionate about his own kind. Fishman, he wouldn't harm his own kind regardless of how they treated humans. He was very compassionate and cared for them. But at the same time, Hody was someone that didn't care about his own kind. He didn't care about anyone. He was just doing it because of what he saw around him. So when you see these things, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're very different. They don't have the same roles, moral compass, anything, and I like how Oda did that. He did something very different, and it made me respect the Fishman Island arc so much more after rewatching it. So that's about it. I mean, that's just my thought process on the arc. Hopefully everybody can understand where I'm coming from, and hopefully you understand why now. Like, I think, you know, Hody Jones is not really that bad of a villain. I think he's put down way too much, and I admit, back in the past, I was one of those that put him down as well. I admit that. I was the one that said he was like Arlong 2.0, but now seeing how he is, and thinking about it, and looking at this arc once again, I realize now how different he is, and what message he actually was, and also what role he plays in the story. It makes him for a really cool character. So, I might make extra videos very soon talking about stuff with, Shirahoshi and all that, the ancient weapons, to Noah and stuff, because there is quite a few things I do want to talk about that was, kind of dived into in this arc. There was a lot of important details that were set up for the future of One Piece that's not even in the manga yet, that the manga hasn't covered, that I actually kind of want to talk about. I might talk about, since a lot of the content here in Fishman Island I never really got to review or talk about on YouTube, so it is definitely something very fun to do. Hopefully you guys enjoyed these videos. I don't know how many of you really care about these videos or if you want any more. I wanted to really talk about this subject, and so if you'd like to see more One Piece videos, like I said, I don't know if you guys care or not, but if you would like to see more, let me know in the comments below, and I might make a topic video on, like, Noah, Shirahoshi, and all of that, and, kind of how Luffy and what role he's going to play in the future with, Fishman Island. But for now, I want to end it there. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe, and if you like this video, please leave a like, and if you also want to continuously get notifications for my videos, please hit the bell icon next to the subscribe button, because for some reason the subscribe button doesn't work, and the only way to get really notifications anymore for video uploads is by clicking the bell icon. Now, even if you don't care about me, okay? Let's say you don't care about me and my notifications, you don't want to get notifications from me, at the very least, do it for YouTubers that you care about, because it will help them out a lot, and if you don't get notifications from YouTubers, then that's most likely the reason, because you haven't hit the bell icon. So, I'm just going to end it there. So, love you guys, have a wonderful day or night wherever you live, please be safe, Chibi out.